And now.
Greetings, ChampCar world. It is I, your CEO, Dana Morrison. It's been a while since I've done one of these Bravo flag videos, and there's been a couple topics I've been meaning to get out and talk about, and the time has come for me to address at least a couple of things. We have a few more things coming, so probably expect a few more of these videos between now and the end of the year. But there was two issues that have been kind of discussionary points, and I felt the best way to push some more information about this out was to do a Bravo flag video. And honestly, I'm just too lazy to type all of this. So here we go. The first thing is we pushed out a proposed new rule book, kind of like a draft copy of it. And quite frankly, we forgot to include a word. And we had a couple discussions about it between myself and the board of directors, and everybody was on board instantly with adding this word because we all kind of realized it was an oversight from the moment we did it. And the word is or equivalent. Some of you probably already know exactly what I'm talking about. Maybe a few of you don't. But we're talking about the way teams repair crash structures. Now, these are structures that support essentially your front and rear bumpers. These are support structures that exist forward of the front wheel center line and rearward of the back wheel's center line. So these are outside of the roll cage areas. We're not talking about roll cage structure here. We're talking about the structure that support things like your bumpers, that kind of stuff. We're not talking about the Nerf style bars here. We're not talking about replacement bumpers and that kind of stuff. We're talking about the mechanisms that hold them up and support them. And you guys should know that as we talked about this stuff and as we adapted this new rule, a huge part of the discussion was to keep repair costs low, to keep racing costs low for you guys, to make it simpler, to make it easier for you guys to repair crash structures. We realized right away when we pushed out the first version of the rule book that just said OEM, that by default, that made it vastly more expensive and more difficult because let's face it, it's hard to go down to who's our sponsor, AutoZone, and find out if you can get a new bumper structure for a 1991 Miata. And it's unlikely that you're going to find one in a junkyard because the reason the car's in the junkyard is because it was in a crash. Ergo, the crash structure is probably already damaged. So this wasn't about making you get brand new OEM equipment. It was about hopefully trying to make it easier for you to repair these things. And that's why the addition of the word or equivalent is so important. We don't want you guys to be in a situation where you have to take on a massive engineering challenge to rebuild a little bit of the crumple zone area on the front of your car after you've been involved in some sort of shunt. What we'd like you to be able to do is to just stretch the component back out into its roughly equivalent shape, get the bumper back out to where within the original confines of the body, the bumper existed, or however you have your structure on your front of the car. And if your front or rear support structure is made out of 14, 16 gauge C-channel steel, get another piece of C-channel steel, drill some holes in it, same size structure as the original, box it over the bent piece, tack weld it in place, because once you bend the structure back into shape, you lose a little bit of the rigidity, tack weld the replacement piece over it, and poof, you're back in business. What we don't want, and some of you have seen this out there, is the few, and very few, but a few teams who have taken the opportunity because they've had a shunt to rebuild this structure into some incredibly robust, way beyond what the factory put in place structure. They've lengthened the car, they've changed the box structure, they've used it as an attachment point for 6 other things. They've radically changed the design of the car under the skin by taking advantage of damage repair. They have replaced steel with aluminum. They've added, 1.20 DOM roll bar tubing and built these massive structures out front. We actually want it to be simpler and easier and cheaper. Just bend the original piece back into shape, use the same type of material, box steel for box steel, C-channel steel for C-channel steel, aluminum if that's what your car came with. Some have round, thin wall, round tubing. Just basically acquire the same type of materials that your original structure was made out of, bend your structure back into place, tack weld the support piece over it, and you're good to go. Drill a couple of holes in it, be nice and light so you're not adding weight out there. You're also not adding massive structure. Again, this is just about the structural area to support your front bumper or your front valence assembly. There is a whole separate rule on replacing bumpers with Nerf bars and that kind of stuff, and we're not addressing that rule. That rule stays exactly as it is. This is just the support structure. So I hope that makes sense. Most of you that were actually affected by it have already talked to us about the inclusion of the word or equivalent. So that word is being added into the rule book. There was an oversight on our part, but we've got to correct it, and we thought the best way to push it out to everybody was just by kind of explaining it. So there you go. I hope that makes sense. If you got any questions about it, please contact us, but I hope that makes sense to you guys. And those of you that have contacted us about it, it's done. Or equivalent is in there. So now let's talk about the second one. This one may take a little bit longer, and I'm going to try and keep this on a broad spectrum conversation. I don't want to get too down into the weeds about a specific incident, but for the sake of clarity, I will touch on the specific incident. I want to talk about protests and more the protest process, kind of how it works. There was a protest filed at Road America, and there's been a lot of discussion about the protest and what it should or should not have contained and what should or should not have been done. But to be clear, the protest literally had 4, maybe 5 words in it, depending upon how you count words. It said swap, JDM-EU, HP difference. That's all the protest had. So when a protest comes into ChampCar, we address what is written on the protest. And you guys can submit it how you want, but it would be helpful if we at least had a rule number to know what specific rule we were addressing through the protest process. We can help you with that a little bit. I'm not going to help you get to the end of your protest by cheating for you in school. But if you do have questions about the rule book, I can, or my staff at the race, we can help you identify what part of the protest you're trying to work out and a rule number and whatnot. But essentially the horsepower difference on here, what we're talking about is the foreign market exception to the swap rule, and that's rule 4.5.6. So that's the starting place. The swap addressed the horsepower difference, the horsepower differential between the original motor that was claimed in the car and the motor that was swapped in. What was claimed was within, and people refer to it as the 3% rule. We actually don't have a 3% rule. We have rule 4.5.6.1, which states as long as it's within 3%, it's okay. And it's clear, it should be important that we focus on the actual rule name so we all know we're going to the same place here. But that's not really what I want to zoom in on here. What I want to talk about is that swap ideology in a large part and how that affects the protest process in large part. So a protest is filed, and if we choose to accept the protest, we address what is written on the protest form, and we determine whether or not the car as it sits right there that day in impound is or is not in violation of the rule. And it should be noted here that what we are addressing is that car that day at that event. A protest at an event is not an indictment of a rule across the board. We're not going to address or change a rule in the rule book based on the result of an impound protest. We are looking at that car as it sits that day at that event and determining whether or not in that moment the car is legal or not legal. And to give you a little bit of a sports analogy, I'm a believer that the tie goes to the runner. I'm not going to take away someone's finishing position unless I am solidly convinced that the car is in violation of the rules, right? So if you're filing the protest, please be prepared to bring me some substantiation of whatever the violation is, right? And it may be something that we can only measure to find out, but you need to at least help me out and tell me what measurement I should be getting, right? The car sits there and it's measured at 1, and according to these internet documents and solid reference material, it should be measured at 2, and I measure it, it comes up at 2. Okay, there we are. So now what happens if we find a car in violation? Essentially a couple of things. The first is, well, obviously the first option is we deny the protest and things stand as they are. But let's say we actually find out that there is a violation. There's a couple different ways it can go. If we determine that the car is in violation and it was legitimately an honest and simple mistake by the team, then we can recalculate their points determine whether or not the new point value, if it is a pointed item, if the new point value, put them over 500, calculate based on the multiplier of the race, and add laps based on the new outcome. We have done this before, and it has in the past changed people's finishing orders. If, on the other hand, in the course of doing the protest investigation, I decide, or I come to believe that the team has intentionally tried to put something over on us, in effect lied to us about what their situation was, then we can and we have disqualified teams for essentially lying to us in ChampCar. There is another possibility. In some cases, something has been protested where there is no allowance for a good faith mistake. For example, some of you may be remembering a particular car at Road America in previous years that was disqualified for fuel capacity. That's because there is no exception in the rule book for being over on fuel capacity. It limits you, under the previous rule book at the time, it limited you to 2 gallons over on the fuel cell. There was no mechanism to add points or give any sort of grace period. Over was over, and we had no choice but to disqualify the car. So again, how we enforce it is based on what is available to us in the rule book. I stated from the very beginning that I was going to adhere to what was written in the rule book, and that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to apply the rule book as written. We're going to use discretion where the rule book allows it, and if the rule book does not allow for discretion, then that's where we wind up. So in this particular case, there was a lot of ongoing discussion about other parts of the car, about the engine itself, about the construction of the engine, about whether or not the manifold was internal, number of cams, this kind of stuff. And to be clear, that's not what was cited in the protest form. The protest form cited horsepower difference. Okay. In the course of a conversation with the board, one of the members on the board who manages the TAC and who is more deeply involved in some of the research on this brought up the fact that the swap form was not available to the team captain who filed the protest. And had this team captain had the swap form available, he may have been able to write a more accurate protest form. That's a valid point. So we're going to do 2 things to correct that problem. In the short term, as teams come through tech inspection with their swap form, we're going to screenshot that and upload it into our registration system in the same way we upload pictures of your car. So that way at impound, we can print out your swap form along with your tech form. In the future, and when I say in the future, this should be within the next couple of months, as soon as our IT guy can get it done, we are going to expand the electronic tech form so the swap form is included as a part of that. So any vehicle that has a swap will have 2 pages on their electronic tech form. And the same way that we print the electronic tech form now, we will print the current version of their swap form. So that information will be available to the team captains at impound so that they can, if they choose, write a more accurate protest form because the information they need will be right there on the paperwork displayed upon the car. So that's how we're going to address that part of the situation. So team captains can have the correct information. Moving on to this a little bit though, the foreign market exception says a couple of things. And one, it says that, and I should back up a little bit, the foreign market exception was put in place, and Chris did a great job of outlining the history of this rule, and we may be able to get some of his historical work published for you guys. But the idea behind the foreign market exception was simply to allow a team to replace a destroyed engine with a much cheaper same style engine from, for example, the Japanese domestic market, right? Back in the day, you could get a Miata motor with 50, 60,000 miles on it, relatively good condition, way fewer miles, and less money than you can get an American engine. So it was a cheaper way to replace your engine and continue to race. We all know that some people have exploited that a little bit and very creatively referenced different motors on our VPI list. And as our VPI list has grown, the opportunities for those exploitations have grown too. But it says a couple of things. It says the engine that you're swapping in must be the same displacement. That's right up, pretty easy. But it also says must be significantly similar. And that's in talking about its construction. Well, initially you would think, well, iron block for iron block and aluminum heads for aluminum heads. That would be pretty straightforward. You know, you can't swap in a Miata motor with an aluminum block and claim it's a direct replacement for an iron block. That just doesn't make any sense. But it says significantly similar. And that's more than just block for block and head material for head material. That means it's got to have the same pistons in it, same compression ratio. If the engine you're taking out has 2 overhead cams, your new motor should have 2 overhead cams. If your old motor has maybe valve adjustment on 1 cam, VTEC style system on 1 cam, your new motor needs to only have VTEC on 1 cam, not both. It needs to essentially be the same motor. Somebody should be able to look at it and go, yep, that's the same motor. Again, I'll use my Miata example because that's kind of my comfort zone. You can't take out a 99 Miata engine and throw in a 2003 Miata engine and say, it's just a JDM replacement, because the 03 motor has the variable valve system on it. And that would mean it's not significantly similar to the 99 motor. They are different engines. They have different pistons, different head assemblies, all that kind of stuff. So what that means as far as the foreign market rule is this: if you're going to swap in an engine, it needs to be the same engine. Now, we know that manufacturers change componentry. So again, let's use my Miata example. Let's use that, chase that down a little further. You swap in a JDM engine and it has the exact same bottom end, but you've got the new head on top of it, the 02, 03 head with the VVT system on it. You need to claim a head swap because that's a different head. It is no longer significantly similar. And if you want to run the newer head, you need to do a head swap. Right. So I hope some of this is making sense. And the bottom line is it needs to be the same engine. It needs to be significantly similar. It needs to be something, if we look at it, it looks like the same engine. If you're going to do an engine swap like this for your documentation, I would suggest taking some pictures of both motors so we can look at them and see what they look like. If you're going to protest it, it would be really helpful if you did some similar research on that and kind of told us exactly what we were looking for. A quick note on the protest thing here, and I know I'm kind of bouncing back and forth between zooming in and kind of zooming out, but there's also nothing that says you have to wait till impound to file a protest. If you've got a really complex protest, something you know is going to take us a while to really do some digging on, it's okay to bring us the form mid-race. The crowd control guys several years ago, and I know everybody's got their opinion on the crowd control guys, but they've always been good to me. They brought me a protest on 2 cars 20 minutes after we went green in a 14-hour race. So I literally had 13 hours and 30 or 40 minutes to do this. And by the time we got to the impound at the end of the race, I had a really solid answer that I knew I could stand on. I had an opportunity to talk to independent engine builders. I had a chance to find similar engines there at the race. I even looked at somebody's personal car to specifically compare what the differences were. I was able to pull spark plugs out and compare them to internet pictures. I was really able to do some research. So the more complex your protest is, there's no problem to bringing it to us a little bit early and kind of front loading us on what's going on. It allows us to do a better job of policing the series for you guys. Again, please keep in mind that me or my staff are not experts on every type of car. We rely on you guys to help us out with these things. I know there's plenty of BMW people out there. There's a lot of Miata people out there, but there's a lot of other engines and vehicle manufacturers that we're not experts in. So we rely on you guys to look at something and say, hey, that's not right. And that leads me to another piece of this thing. There's a concept floating around out there, and it was addressed in this particular protest, but I want to address it more from a broad spectrum thing. And that's this concept of pre-approval, that because somebody or a team brings a concept to tech or to me in advance, and we say, yeah, that sounds good, go ahead, that somehow that gives them immunity from the protest process, right? Immunity from prosecution. Well, that is not true. That is not how it works. And some of you may remember the days when people would show up at tech inspection with an email from the tech inspector and said, no, I got an email, so it's fine. The mystery emails, right? We're not going back to that. So we want you to talk to us in advance, right? We want you to let us know, especially if you got some crazy concept. We may be able to save you some heartache and aggravation. For example, if you come to me and say, hey, I'm thinking about putting a Lamborghini engine in my Miata. Well, I can save you a lot of time by saying, 1, that's a terrible idea, but 2, the Lamborghini motor is not on our VPI list. So therefore, you would not be allowed to do that. I can save you some time. But if you do come and say, hey, I'm thinking about swapping motor X and the platform Y, we can say, well, there's nothing wrong with that. Both of them are potentially on the VPI list, and the foreign market exception allows you to do it. But whether you come to us in advance or whether you bring that swap paperwork to tech, we're still relying on the teams to tell us the truth on the front end. And we're big boys enough to know that that's not always the case. Or even if they are telling us the truth, they're telling us a carefully crafted version of the truth to make sure they can get to the answer they want. And I say that not to be glib, but we know that's a thing. But those vehicles are still subject to the impound process, and they're still subject to being deemed that, hey, wait a minute, you went beyond your initial intention here. The car is wrong. What you said you did is not what you actually did. So you're still subject to the impound process. And as I said earlier, at impound, we're ruling on the condition of that car right there in that moment at that race. Just because we deny a protest once at a race also does not render that car immune from being protested again in the future. That's only as it exists right there at that particular race. If you want to protest the car again at the next race, if you want to refine your protest or even do more research on it, we're totally open to hear it again. Now, probably not going to take a protest on the exact same thing just because you didn't like the outcome last time. But if you've got more information or you've refined what you know about the car, we're totally happy to look at it again. So I want to make sure that there's no conception out there that, one, because somebody asked TAC or a board member or our chief technical officer or me for that matter, that they get an automatic free pass on things. That's not how it works. And just because we deny a protest once doesn't render that car, doesn't put some sort of shield of invincibility over them for forever. Any car that goes into impound at the end of the race is subject to being protested for anything that's in the rule book. Doesn't matter whose car it is, what mechanism within ChampCar they serve on, doesn't matter. If they're in impound, they're subject to being looked at. So let's talk about this foreign market thing a little further because we know there's cars out there. We talked at the board meeting last night about putting this information out, the mechanism of it, and whether we should give teams a chance to refine what they're doing, whether we should give them till the end of this year or a grace period or whatever else. And I'm saying that's not how we're going to do it. You know what your car is. You know what the foreign engine exception is, the foreign market exception. You know what you've got in your car now. Govern yourself accordingly. If your car is not right, if it's not in compliance with the foreign market exception as it's written, you probably need to get it within what we're talking about here, right? Get it right. If it's protested, I'm going to look at the rule book as it's written. I'm going to look at the information that the team provides. And if it's wrong, it's wrong. So as I said before, govern yourself accordingly. If you think your motor is right, you're all good. If you know your motor package is wrong and you know you're skirting the rules, if I were you, I'd get it fixed. If you're honestly, legitimately not sure, drop a ticket in on the tech desk and ask. We'll be happy to answer your question. But remember, that doesn't render you immune from somebody else filing a piece of paper and going, I disagree with this and I have some additional information and I want to put it out there. So I'm glancing down here at my notes to see if I've missed any part of this, and it's dark. So I'm going to have to lift my paper up here, make sure I got it. I think that just about covers it. So Polly is watching, and I had asked Polly to let me know at the end of this thing if what I said made sense to him. And so I'm going to look at Polly and see if I get a thumbs up or a thumbs down and or anything. Or he's got his mic in his hand. If he wants to speak, he's giving me the thumbs up of, yeah, So Polly, does that make sense to you? Especially as somebody who wasn't familiar with any of the backstory. Does that kind of make sense? Did I lay that out right?
Yeah, I think probably most of the members would understand except for me.
I happen to be working on a car that's a platform swap plus an engine swap. Does that have anything to do with the JDM, or are they similar, the same thing, totally different?
So how does that play out?
So,
do you take laps, or what do you do?
Platform swaps are completely different. And I just dropped my notes. Well, there those stay. Platform swaps are completely different. And a swap between two cars that are on the VPI list that are both available in the U.S. domestic market are regulated under different rules. And there is a horsepower difference calculator. The 3% element of it is specific to the foreign market exception. And that was put in there to allow people to swap in motors from, say, a Japanese domestic market, whereas maybe the American motor was listed at 140 horsepower and the JDM motor was listed as 142 or 143. It was allowed it was allowed so that you could swap it in and say, listen, this is a standard replacement for my car, without having to go through the whole swap calculator as a swap. So from what you're saying, it doesn't sound like it's a foreign market exception. It's a straight up platform swap, which is regulated under a different part of the rule set.
Makes sense.
All right, everyone. We did feel like we needed to address this protest thing, but we also didn't want to just make some sort of knee-jerk reaction. We really wanted to talk about it. And it should also be noted in here, I just remembered something else I'd written down. Even if we deny a protest, that doesn't mean that your board of directors may not look at the rule or the situation, again, from a broader standpoint, and maybe look for a petition submission into the next year to make a fundamental change in the rule. We might do nothing. We might change a rule. We might decide just to review some language and tweak how we're doing things, or we might just say, no, it's fine. It's actually good exactly the way it is and within the rules. But just because a protest is denied doesn't mean that we never, ever look at it ever again. And it certainly doesn't mean that we don't take the concerns of the person submitting the protest seriously. So I thought it was worth explaining a little bit about this particular protest without beating it up and going into the weeds on it, but maybe just to help you guys understand a little bit better how the protest process works in the field. So with that said, we pushed out a podcast the other day with some information about the new schedule. We've got great attendance ramping up here for the races we do have between now and the end of the year. So I'm excited about the finish of the year. I'm excited about going to a few places next year. Also looking forward to add 1 or 2 more tracks, but we wanted to get the schedule out now so you guys can start planning. But yeah, looking forward to some exciting new stuff in 2024. We really appreciate you guys racing with us. We know there's a lot of options out there, as they say, appreciate you choosing to race with ChampCar. Hope you guys continue to race with us again in the future. Thank you guys very much.